Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Okay, let's make sure everything's fine. Okay, hope everyone's doing well. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Larry Klein, and welcome to the 13th, lucky 13th installment of our virtual office hours. And for people that haven't attended before, welcome. People say that they really appreciate these weekly live stream addresses, so I'll continue to do them while the shelter in place continues, and possibly even longer. This Facebook Live event allows me to, give you some updates on what's happening in the city, within the county, answer a few questions, and also just provide some words of encouragement. So I hope that helps. Thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during these extraordinary times. So please remember to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. Get outside of your house, go to your backyard. It's summertime. We're finally in June, and it's nice to be outside. Hopefully it's not too hot this summer, but sheltering in place has helped flatten the curve, and so please keep that up. We see the numbers, and we'll go through the numbers a little bit later, but the county health order still is in place. You can help stop the spread of the virus, and that's the important thing. Continue to wash your hands. Don't touch your face. Maintain safe social distancing when you're out. Reduce the number of people that you're coming in contact with, and of course, as always, wear your face mask. Whatever, if you need a face covering of some sort, if you don't have one, definitely feel free to reach out. If you only have disposables, definitely feel free to reach out, because I think it's important that everyone have one available as you're going into retail, as you're going into restaurants, as you're just seeing people out on the sidewalk. It's important to maintain that safe social distance, because it does help. We're not out of the woods yet, but we are seeing things starting to open up, and we'll continue to see things change as things open up at a county level, at a state level, and a city level, and kind of in response to what's happening there. So before we begin the normal weekly overview, for the last few weeks, I've started my weekly address with a short discussion on racism. And I'll reiterate what I said before. Hate and racism have no place in our community. And, I talked previously about the hate crime that happened last year. We'll talk a little bit in a little bit about the march and the rally that happened last week. But from my standpoint, that message is critical. It's we are an inclusive community, and the concept of hate and racism, you know, aren't part of our community and shouldn't be part of our community. So let's go ahead and get started. We're now 94 days, almost 100, 94 days after the March 16th public health order that started the shelter in place and slowed the spread of COVID-19 in our community. Since that declaration, a lot has happened. A lot happens every day. I have conference calls and press conferences to watch or confer on. I advocate with our county elected people, our state and federal representatives, trying to make sure that we, get the appropriate representation and funding that we need from a county standpoint, trying to make sure that we open up in a safe manner, but also clarifying, questions that always come up as we're talking about what the current health order is, and there's always new questions that come up. So let's talk about a little bit about what happened over the last week. And last week I mentioned it, but I didn't really go into depth. So let's talk about what happened last Thursday. So the VTA board met last Thursday night, and it approved several projects related to Measure B. And if you remember, in 2016, Measure B was a transportation measure for Santa Clara County. And that was critical because it provided, additional funding for VTA for certain projects. It helped, of course, with the BART extension. It helped ped and bike projects throughout the county. And so we had several projects that I've been advocating for some time, but two specific projects that I do want to bring up. One is a homestead safe routes project. So the VTA Board of Directors approved funding for the Homestead Safe Routes project. And this was basically because there were several schools in that neighborhood, in that area along Homestead, and it's attended by both Cupertino, Sunnyvale, and Los Altos children. And so there's a mixture of ages from high school to middle school. There's a mixture of just basically different issues of crossing like Highway 85 and all of that. And so this effort started about a year ago, working with Supervisor Smidian's office, trying to figure out, and actually longer than that as far as the initial study of what needed to get done. So there was initial study done that was started almost 2 years ago and finally finished about a year ago. Part of that was figuring out what the next steps are. And so working with Supervisor Smidian's office, the county is ultimately taking the lead agency because Homestead is split between 3 different cities. Having Sunnyvale or Cupertino or Los Altos trying to take the lead on this multi-jurisdictional project sometimes causes problems. And it was also bandwidth, and especially not looking, not even seeing COVID-19 in the future. I think it was important that the county office, county transportation, take the lead as far as that's concerned, because it was also dealing with Highway 85, and they have a little bit more pull from a county standpoint. So the funding was approved. So for a Homestead Road standpoint, and that funding totaled $1.17 million. And that's to do the environmental clearance, to do the final design, and hopefully even a little portion of the implementation. So it will be shovel ready, and then once it's shovel ready, once that final design is complete, then it allows us to get even more grant funding, either from a federal standpoint or from a state standpoint. So that's a big step forward as far as Homestead and safe routes to schools. the other big thing, of course, was the Stevens Creek Trail funding. And so, I was on the Four Cities Citizens Advisory Commission almost 10 years ago now, or about 8 or 9 years ago now. And for the last year and a half, I've been advocating with Mountain View because they're the lead agency that owns the majority of the land for the next phase going south. And I advocated with their mayor, and finally, and working with residents to advocate also, finally building that coalition of residents to also help out. Mountain View committed $600,000 to that project, which then, of course, I had Sunnyvale do a similar sort of commitment. So together, both of our cities committed $600,000 for the Stevens Creek Trail extension next phase, and then put in for money for matching grants, matching Measure B funds from the county. And so VTA also approved funding from 2016 Measure B funds for Stevens Creek Trail. So, this is a fantastic win for the South Bay, in my opinion, especially the North Valley. It will, if the Stevens Creek Trail itself, will finally be moving towards, construction, and the extension of that Class 1 trail for bicyclists, runners, hikers. It's a fantastic thing, and it also, part of that project will improve the riparian habitat for the birds and the wildlife in that area, as well as also improvements to Stevens Creek Trail itself. So I think that's a really big win, and I don't think I really highlighted that last week with everything that was going on, but it was really important. And then last Friday, as we talked about last Friday, a new county health order went in place. So every 2 or 3 weeks, we will see, another step towards opening up. And as Governor Newsom said earlier this week, yeah, we will see, conceivably spikes in the number of COVID-19 cases as things go forward. But that's one of the reasons why we have, appropriate testing in place, making sure that we have enough tracing. And then, of course, the other thing from a county standpoint is just making sure that we have enough beds and PPE equipment. And that was the whole thing, that right now all that looks good, and we're tracking that. The county is tracking that on a daily basis. But the new county health order that went in place, it allowed several things. One, it allowed outdoor dining at restaurants and other facilities that prepare and serve food. Retail shopping centers are allowed to have in-store shopping now. And then childcare, summer camps, summer school, and all educational activities and recreational programs for all children. So that's the important thing. It still needs to be stable groups of 12, but as far as having childcare as well as restaurants, retail, things are starting to open up. There's manufacturing, house cleaning, low contact services. So, shoe repair, watch repair, pet grooming, all that's now allowed. Other activities that are allowed are, small ceremonies, so religious ceremonies of up to 25 people outdoors, but that's the important thing. It needs to be outdoors. And then activities that don't require physical contact, which we've kind of also already allowed, tennis, hiking, golf, that sort of thing. And of course, to operate, and I just want to remind businesses, any business owners that are out there, please fill out the county health order, and that will give you a safe social distancing protocol. You need to fill that out. And one of the things that I clarified with the county last weekend was that you need to actually send that back to the county, and that hasn't been fully clear. So there's a form that you need to fill out. You need to print and have that posted, but you also need to send something back to the county. Although they're not being stringent, if they come out and see that you don't have everything listed, they will just give you a warning. And you should, if you fill it out, then you should have this check mark that was also be able to be displayed in your window. So they're trying to make it more, the county's trying to make it a little more accurate and easier for residents and customers to see, as well as owners to see what's the standard practice for the different restaurants that you're going to, for the different uh, retail establishments that you're going to. And then as far as dining establishments outdoors, it's groups of no more than 6 people. All the people should be from the same household, living together. Members of separate households are not allowed and at the same table. And then tables should be separated by at least 6 feet. So this is some of the opening up. You're allowed to be outdoors, and alcohol still must be sold with food. So bars aren't allowed to open, but those establishments that sell both food and alcohol can sell alcohol if people are purchasing food. Okay. And then, of course, last Friday, which was a good portion of our discussion, was the march and rally. So, there was a peaceful march that most residents have already heard about, that started at 5 p.m. at Redwood Square and went to City Hall. So it marched down McKinley and then down Matilda, and ultimately ending up at City Hall. And that rally had over 2,000 people. It's the largest in recent Sunnyvale memory. I've been here 30 years, and people couldn't remember a rally that big in Sunnyvale's history. And it was a peaceful protest. I've been working with the organizers, and the organizers have been working with our public safety. And the organizers were Sunnyvale High School students who wanted to get involved. And I think that was important, wanting to highlight, and bring people together to talk about, racial inequalities in our city and the surrounding cities. I heard of residents even coming as far as Santa Cruz just to attend, our Sunnyvale rally. So, it was a good rally. It was, I was very proud of everybody who spoke. People were wearing their face masks, so people were, trying to be safe from COVID-19. And certain people, as I mentioned last week, were afraid that it might get out of hand. We saw a lot of businesses boarded up, but it was completely peaceful, and it was heart wrenching to hear some of the stories. I was proud of people that stood up and sometimes in tears were willing to share their experiences, and that was that was very difficult for them, to stand up and speak in front of 2,000 people. And there were some issues with the sound system. People in the back couldn't completely hear, and I was there to listen. I was there to listen and learn. I got in line to at least welcome the people that spoke, and all the rally people, as well as thank the students who organized it. And I got in line about an hour before the end, and well, probably an hour and a half. It was supposed to end at 7 p.m. I was still in line at that point, and around 7:30, they finally invited the mayor up to help kind of close out the event. And I was happy that to thank people that were there. I was proud to hear their stories, and this to me was a start of an important dialogue. For me, it's we do, and as I mentioned last week, I took the mayor's pledge. If you haven't yet had a chance yet, listen to Obama's town hall. It is really important. It is about reviewing what our policies are, engaging the community, reporting, and then figuring out what reforms we're going to put in place. So that to me was stage one, or step one, to a large degree. And from a community standpoint, we're doing a lot of things so sign up for the Unity mail list, and I've mentioned it. I posted about it several times already. We will have a series of dialogues with the community, at least one Zoom meeting, and hopefully we'll be actually able to have live meetings before not too long, as everybody's safely social distanced. There'll be one in Spanish. There'll be one with youth. So we're still figuring out the best, kind of breakdown of those meetings, but making sure that the mayor's there, the city manager's there, the police chief is there to hear the stories. I think that's really critical. And then figuring out what steps we're going to do going forward. So, if for those that attended, I thank you. I was, really heartened, and to see everybody, with their signs and marching. It was a historic moment in Sunnyvale's history. So I was happy to be part of it, and happy to, highlight the, what our community is doing. And I want to also thank our Department of Public Safety for keeping everyone safe. They were there. They shut down Matilda. They made sure all the marchers passed by with lines of cars in either direction going north and south, and making sure that they weren't, they were present, but not inhibiting the peaceful march and the peaceful rally. So I was really happy to see that from that standpoint. And then on Monday, it was another historic day. On Monday, we closed Murphy Avenue down to traffic. So on Monday, we put up the bollards, we put up signage, we did a lot of things. And we've been hearing about, this request comes up every few years, and usually the downtown businesses have not, some of them have, but a lot of them haven't wanted to shut down Murphy Avenue and make it into a pedestrian-only zone. And from that standpoint, it comes up, and the residents want it, but the businesses say it's going to hurt their business. I took to the Downtown Association back in January saying we're already kind of doing it 8 weeks out of the year, because on Saturdays we have the markets. So year round we have the markets in the morning on Saturdays, and then in the summertime we would have 8 weeks of jazz, and so we would close down the Murphy Avenue in the evening on Saturday evening. So it was closed on Saturdays anyway, and so I was proposing try to do that as a year-round effort, just so that to show them that businesses aren't hurt and people like that pedestrian zone. That being said, once COVID-19 happened and we knew that outdoor seating would be the first steps for restaurants, some of them have an appropriate amount of sidewalk space, but not enough to do good social distancing. And so moving out to the streets was an obvious thing. And so it was good to work with them to request. They requested the city to do at least the next 6 months, and then we'll reevaluate that at the end of the 6 months. If you're on Murphy Avenue, definitely thank the restaurants. And the more that message gets out there that the residents want it, to see that they're having people and they're able to have servers again at the restaurants is only positive for them. So keep that in mind as you're going forward. From a city standpoint, we're already permitting, so we streamlined the permitting process, and we ended up waiving the fee, the $186 permit fee that restaurants would normally have to do as far as outdoor seating. Okay, and then let's see. And the other thing that does is it also it closes down or removes the long-term or 3-hour parking along Washington, and makes that pickup parking. So it's for people to drop off people. So it's now short-term parking. It's also, you can call in an order, and their spaces marked along Washington, and signs up so that you can pull up and say I'm at parking space number 6 or number 3, and that's where they'll deliver to. So it is still a work in progress, but I think it's really important to see that it's finally happened. People have been overjoyed to see that, and we were hoping to have music. And I've been talking to the Downtown Association. They canceled all their summer events, so Wednesday night music and Saturday night music. That being said, they are looking at other solutions like strolling musicians or something of that nature. They can't we can't have tons of people set up with their lawn chairs like we always do. You know what summer has become for so many years in downtown Sunnyvale. But that doesn't mean we can't have a party. That things that to have an ambiance of music. I think that will actually improve and make people even feel more comfortable to be downtown. But right now, the biggest thing is, we close the street. Chairs and tables are now being moved out into the street, not just the sidewalks. And restaurants are serving. So if you haven't had a chance to come back to downtown Sunnyvale, now's the perfect time. And then on Tuesday, council met and we did several things. First, we declared June as LGBTQ Pride Month. And so last Monday, so almost 2 weeks ago now, June 1st, Sunnyvale kicked off Pride Month with the flag raising event at City Hall. I said a few comments, and there was even a car parade around City Hall. So it was, a small event. Hopefully, it'll be a bigger event next year. But the flag will fly the entire month of June, and that was authorized back in 2019 to fly that flag on an annual basis for the month of June. So that was one of the things that we had a special order of the day, declaring June as Pride Month. Second, we adopted a resolution denouncing xenophobia and anti-Asian sentiment due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we reaffirmed our city values and support and commitment to the well-being and safety of our Asian American residents. And so 4 weeks ago, as president of the Cities Association of Santa Clara County, we did a similar resolution again denouncing xenophobia at the Cities Association. And I thought it was important to bring that also to our city, and especially when I heard, in the last 2 weeks that we had, I'll say, a xenophobic incident that happened at one of our parks. And, just to reiterate, we don't tolerate hate against any faith, any belief, any people, any background. This is not Sunnyvale. We're an inclusive city, and it was important to make that statement for our different community members. And it also, at least what I've heard from other cities, that once they did that resolution to kind of reaffirm our commitment to our Asian community, they heard of even more, let's say, incidents that occurred. So people feel free, more free to raise their voice and raise their hand if something has happened. And I know these are difficult times, but that's no excuse for any discrimination, any kind of remarks against anyone else. So thanks for listening to that. And I was, I was heartened, that we unanimously approved that from a council standpoint. Third, we also committed, let's see, what was it? 6 weeks ago, approximately 5 or 6 weeks ago, as president of the Cities Association of Santa Clara County, I worked with all the mayors, all 15 mayors, to write a letter to the county health department and the county board of supervisors to give us first more clarity, more transparency as far as testing and tracing is concerned, and what the steps are going forward, and figuring out and asking to be partners and collaborate on what that solution is. And so since then, things have changed. But one of the things that part of that partnership is the county was asking for resources to help with tracing, especially as we start to open back up. We will see a spike in new cases, and once we see somebody that has COVID-19, we need to then contact and do contact tracing of everyone that person's been in contact with for the last 2 weeks or so. And so the county has already applied, I think, 300 or 400 employees onto that effort. They're in the process of dealing with volunteers from around the county. From a city standpoint, we approved 7 employees who volunteered to work in that effort for the next 3 months. And the county initially said that they wanted 6 to 12 months of 40 hours a week. They've kind of reduced that down to 3 months it may be a little bit more, but 3 months of 24 to 40 hours a week. So if you want to volunteer, definitely reach out to me. Look on the county website. I have that URL handy. It's basically you can help on that effort, and especially if you are, a retired healthcare individual, or if you have, access or access to a computer, and also the big thing is if you're multilingual, that's a big plus too. So part of that was to make sure that we are doing our part to help out that tracing effort. And then one last thing that we did was we removed the requirement for getting signatures for ballot statements. So from a Sunnyvale standpoint, for people that are running for their district or for mayor, and yes, a few people have asked, and I've posted, although the campaign isn't fully in gear yet, as far as the website and signage. Yes, I am running for mayor. But one of the things that we did, or one of the things we do from a city standpoint, is if you get 250 residents to sign a petition, basically sign a letter that says they back you for getting on the ballot, then the city pays for that ballot measure, that ballot measure statement to be printed as part of the ballot information that people receive in the mail. So that's some of our campaign financing that the city does to make sure that we support those people that are running for office and making sure that they get their voice out there. And if they just get enough people backing them, that's one of the reasons why we fund that. That being said, with today's COVID-19, the county registrar still requires handwritten signatures and addresses for all their paperwork. So to have conceivably the 250 people sign the same piece of paperwork and being passed around, and you can deal with pens and pencil, or the pens issues. Everybody has to have their own pen, but it was just seen as too much of a burden in the times of COVID-19 when people were afraid. Some people were afraid to even answer their door. So we decided to, at least for this year, waive that requirement of getting those 250 signatures. It was also, one of the things I was pushing for was trying to see if e-signatures could be done. DocuSign and a lot of these services are now valid. That being said, the county registrar does not allow e-signatures, and maybe it will change sometime in the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 6 months, but either at a county level or Governor Newsom might change things. He's changed several things as far as this year's election based upon COVID-19, but right now e-signatures aren't allowed, and so from that standpoint we can't pivot to try to do that. And so it was safer for our residents to, at least for this year, get rid of that requirement and still fund people's ballot statements. There was also a cost that each one of those signatures had to be validated by the county, and each of those validations cost the city. So we were being kind of doubly cost from the cost of the ballot statement and also reaffirming that the listed residents on those sheets of paper were actual registered voters in the city. That being said, getting those signatures did show a certain amount of support to make sure that there was some sort of barrier to making sure that only valid people are really running for city office. So that was, it was a busy evening, lots going on. We appointed, I think, 17 different people to boards and commissions. And that being said, if you are ever interested in helping out the city, our boards and commissions are one of the best ways of doing that. And we're constantly taking applications for our boards and commissions, so do consider that for the future. On Wednesday, we had another big change in services. Our library opened plaza service. So the library is still closed, but the library will now be providing limited services out on the sidewalk in front of the library, Monday through Friday, 1 to 6 p.m. So it's fairly limited still. It's pickup. It's for pickup and placing holds on library materials. It's returning library materials if you haven't returned them yet. It's getting a library card or getting some other assistance from a librarian. So you still need to wear your face mask. Still need to provide safe social distancing. So there's people are lined up at a safe distance when you're dealing with the librarian. Definitely, it's good to see um, actual people be able to check out books again. There's a vast variety of online material that a library provides, but it's also important to especially young children love to have books, and so the feel for books is much better than looking at screens all day, and I agree that with that too. So definitely, I've heard a lot of positive comments that we finally have our library services open again. And then on Wednesday, and just an aside, there was our chief of public safety, Chief No, was interviewed on Marketplace, and so I used to listen to Marketplace at least in pre-COVID-19. I would time my commute to make sure I heard Marketplace, either going to work in the morning or coming home at night. But uh, I haven't really been listening, but I was happy to see that they interviewed Chief No, and he was able to talk about our very specific model, and I think that makes our community even that much more unique. Is we have our model for our public safety officers is that they're all trained on police, fire, and EMS. And for me, that was really good to get the word out there that there is a different way of doing things. Last year at a mayor's conference, I met the mayor from Kalamazoo, Michigan, and Mayor uh, Hopewell was exactly like me, really overjoyed with that model because it saves the city money. It makes a very different type of public safety officer who both is there to protect its residents as well as look at their safety from when there's a fire, whenever there's an occurrence, health issue, they're first on the scene. So it was really good, to hear his stories and kind of relate them to what happens in our community. And then I've also been in contact with Minneapolis Mayor Frey, because they're talking about changing their model and kind of pointing out, here's a great interview, and it talks about, we did it back in the 1950s. The Kalamazoo, Michigan, did it in the 1980s, so they ended up merging two to the fire and the police at that time. We did it back in the 50s when we were going to a full-time fire and police department. Okay, so if you get a chance, listen to that Marketplace interview or read the transcript. It's not super long, but it actually gives a good overview of what the city's doing. And then on Thursday, and so this has been an ongoing discussion. We've been, I've been talking to the chief, to the city manager. They've been listening to, the residents. They've been talking to, the other police chiefs. Our police chief is head of the county police chiefs organization, and figuring out what makes sense. And on June 5th, Governor Newsom ordered the California Commission on Police Officer Standards and Training post, which you might see those initials around, to discontinue and remove the carotid control holding training. So, and I just want to thank our DPS for listening to our community and, of course, being part of that dialogue. But DPS, as of Thursday, now prohibits the use of the carotid control hold by any member of the department. So that was an important step forward. We'd already outlawed, we basically, part of our training and rules didn't have chokeholds in general, but the carotid control hold was still allowed, and that's now been removed. And what an important thing that they did yesterday was they they put a fairly long post in response to all the 8 can't wait items. And I think, if people have a chance to read through that, it is really important. The chokeholds and strangleholds, are not allowed, and they're not part of the use of force options for our public safety. There's de-escalation training. There's, uh, exhausting all alternatives before shooting is part of our normal operation. Shooting at moving vehicles, is there. One of the important things is it's rarely effective. It requires, our DPS policy requires an officer to move out of the path of an approaching vehicle instead of discharging their vehicle at one of the occupants. So there's important things that are listed there, from that standpoint, the duty to intervene, and I think that's an important thing that some residents were worried about. DPS policy requires public safety officers to intercede when another officer uses force that is clearly beyond that which is required and necessary. And that officer must report any observations to his supervisor. And so and that's part of the reporting process, part of the review process. And comprehensive reporting is part of our standard practices, and this is why we're starting that dialogue. It's important to, and it's important to hear what the procedures are, hear back from our residents, and figuring out how to reform them. That to me is one of the reasons why I signed on to the mayor's pledge. It is reviewing those policies, reviewing them with other police officers, engaging with the community to hear their what their feelings are, and then reporting back to council and the community, and finally figuring out what those reforms are going to be. And then that's pretty much it for the last week. As far as today is concerned, I did want to bring up one thing, since we're today, finally, after 20 years, 30 years, BART is finally officially opening. So the virtual ribbon cutting is available. So once this live stream is over, you can switch over to the VTA website or the VTA Facebook stream and see what's going to happen. Because of the social distancing, there will be a ribbon cutting ceremony, but everything is socially distanced. So it'll be televised, and only a few people will actually be there on site. But it's only by invitation only. But it's been a long time coming. It's been multiple county measures. It's been funding from the state and the federal government, but it's finally here. BART is opening those stations. So this weekend, if you want, you can take BART to Berkeley or to San Francisco. So it's really important. It's a big step forward from a regional transportation point. So kudos to everyone who's worked so hard on getting to this point. There's been lots of delays, lots of issues between VTA staff and BART, but finally we're there, and BART service is finally open. And then as far as the county dashboard is concerned, new cases continue to drop. There has been a little spike in the last week. We went from about 2,850 cases last week to about 3,000 cases this week from a countywide standpoint. And so there's been a slight increase. San Jose went from went up about 150 cases to almost 2,000 cases just from San Jose. So of the 3,063 cases from a countywide standpoint, about 2,000 of them are in San Jose. Sunnyvale went up 6 cases from last week, so we're now at 168 cases. And as we get more testing, that's important. As we've seen, the rallies, and I'll say a lot of people not wearing masks at the rallies, I think you will see a little bit of a spike because of that. But The testing is increasing, so we're over 2,000 tests a day for COVID-19 on average, and it peaks and goes up and down. There's issues in how quickly things are reported and then how quickly test results are reported. So there's a lot of variability there. Hospital availability looks good. So, and PPE stores are also very good. So from that standpoint, things are looking good. I think we will see a spike as far as cases are concerned as things open up and as there's more people out in the community. But I do think that we have things, at least we're watching closely and have things under control currently. And I've continued to do a lot of advocating. I continue to have discussions with our county supervisors and regional leaders. First, we should be getting a county health van that's going to be doing COVID-19 tracing sometime in the next 2 weeks, and it might be 2 days a week, it might be 1 day a week for half a day. We're still working that out with the county, and we haven't confirmed the actual location or dates yet, but we'll be publicizing that from a city standpoint as soon as that's available. But Mountain View has had their van coming into Ringstorff Park once a week for half a day. Let's see, Mountain View's also adding a permanent location, the Planned Parenthood site in Mountain View. So, and that's in Shoreline Park or Shoreline North Bayshore area. So that's happening also. Other things I've been doing, I've been working with the county supervisors and other regional leaders on a commute free tomorrow discussion. And so that's looking at, looking at our air quality increasing, has gotten so much better when people sheltered in place, looking at how traffic has gotten better. It's important to see how we can continue to do these good measures after people start going back to work. Is it, requiring city staff or businesses to have people stay at home and work remotely 2 or 3 days a week if they can? So it's figuring out how to make sure we take advantage of the wins that we've had over the last 3 months from an environmental standpoint. And the other thing is I'm co-chair of a mayor's recovery council. So it's working with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group to figure out best measures and practices of how all of our cities, and so it's mayors from Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, Alameda County, getting together to talk about best practices, what they're hearing from their residents, from their businesses, and then kind of working also with a similar business recovery council on what we're going to do to work forward past COVID-19 and how we recover in best fashion. So doing a lot of advocating, doing a lot of meeting as far as that's concerned. So let's move on to questions before we run out of time. Let's see. First, from Carol, is it possible to have our Wednesday night outdoor bands dances sometimes in September, October? It would be appreciated and would also bring in a lot of business and bring residents back to the downtown area. So as I mentioned earlier, right now the Downtown Association has canceled the concerts for the summer. They'll keep evaluating and looking at adding musicians, strolling musicians or whatever, different nights of the week, sometime in the next month or two downtown. And so they're still working through the details of that. But I do think that we'll have some sort of atmosphere downtown from a musical standpoint. One question that we had last week that I answered, but was curious about the newly constructed property in the corner of Hollenbeck and El Camino. Last week I said it was doctor's offices. Actually, since then, an imaging center sign has went up, so obviously they're moving towards people moving in with the signage going up. So that's been very positive. Several people have asked me, what are you doing for the restaurants that are not in downtown? And so from a city standpoint, the $187 permit fee for outdoor dining, uh, waiving that fee and helping restaurants streamline that process isn't just for downtown restaurants. It's for restaurants around the city that want to move into their sidewalks, and if they have their landlord's um, approval, moving out conceivably into parking spaces. But that applies to the entire city. So, restaurants, making sure that they're successful and come and can come back after COVID is really important. And that outdoor seating is very important for customers to actually feel comfortable. And also, it allows them to actually start hiring serving staff to deal with customers that are out there. So, and I've already heard of Casa Lupe and a few restaurants that never used their sidewalks before finally moving out on the sidewalk. So that's a positive occurrence. I'm happy to see that that's happened. Let's see. Kelly asked, I was reading about all phases and what will open up when. Do you know about youth sports? Is there something that could be potentially open this summer? Right now, I have no idea about youth sports and when that'll be open. It's We have, in part of the county order, did open up camps and educational kind of items. So youth sports wasn't part of that, and from a county order standpoint, it still needed to be groups of 12 or less. But youth sports I will hopefully be open later in the summer, but right now, no idea when. That's the whole concept of sports in general is a big question mark, as you see from whether or not it's pro baseball or basketball that's starting up again without fans, and trying to figure out how to make sure that the players don't have COVID-19. And so this is a big deal, and figuring out how we do that is important. Are we allowing park reservations? Churches can have small services for up to 25 people outdoors, and so could they reserve and conduct service at Murphy Park Amphitheater or Opie Amphitheater? So with the latest county health order, churches can have small outdoor services, up to 25 people, but they don't all have kind of space for that. Conceivably they could use parking lots for that, or there's several parks with amphitheaters in them. So currently the city is not currently taking park reservations, but we're encouraging groups to use park spaces as long as they're conforming to the guidelines. But they can use that on a first come first serve basis. So we are allowing that, and that's one way for conceivably certain of our religious organizations to meet. And next, I have this question in several ways. When is the pool opening? And I also got the comment. We received a notice today that California Sports Center that runs the Sunnyvale Fremont pool was pulled out of running the facility, and the pool will remain closed. Pools are one of the most safe environments to be within with the scare of COVID. How do we get our pool reopened? So that has been an ongoing question. We found out from a city standpoint that of course, and weren't completely happy about California Sports Center, basically saying that, due to COVID-19, they're unable to sustain their business operations at the Sunnyvale Swim Complex. And so I've heard the same thing. The city's currently analyzing its options. Part of the issue is not just the pool area, but it's the locker rooms and people changing. It's making sure whether making sure everybody is doing lap pool only. So there's lots of issues there that need to be worked through from that standpoint. So we're evaluating it. No guarantees right now. That was one of the reasons why from a city standpoint we weren't staffing that pool. We were outsourcing that to California Sports Center. So we'll see where this goes going forward. Hopefully they will reevaluate and figure out that if they can do something else. Is the Art and Wine Festival canceled? Yes. as far as everything I've heard from from the Chamber of Commerce, the Art and Wine Festival is canceled for this year. There was talk about trying to move it to the fall. Logistically, that makes it very, very difficult. And I know that there are a lot of, let's say, small neighborhood associations that get money from selling beer and wine at one of the booths, or helping out at the ticket booth. So getting tips. That isn't happening this year, and we're looking at ways to conceivably help them. But right now, that's not the case. When will gyms open in Sunnyvale? Right now, that's not part of the health order. So, let's see what happens as far as that's concerned. When it happens, you'll be the first to know. I'm hoping that every 2 or 3 weeks we'll start seeing gyms, see more. Right now we're in stage 2, going into stage 3 with gyms. I've been pushing them on kind of personal, low contact gyms. So whether or not that's cycle gyms, or Pilates or yoga studios, all those are possibilities. Let's see. How come gyms and preschools can open before playgrounds? So preschools can be open, they're having to be requiring their staff to make sure that high contact services are being cleaned down. And so there's all kinds of orders from a preschool standpoint of how they do that. There's no way that we can actually, city staff can constantly monitor playgrounds and washing them down and making sure that the contact surfaces that are part of playgrounds are actually, being cleaned down on a regular basis, and trying to spread trying to stop the spread of COVID-19 is really important. And so that's critical that we're currently keeping those closed. One thing that did open over the last week is dog parks, so that people can go to the dog parks. They still have to be socially distanced. They have to wear their masks, but the dogs can interact, which is finally being allowed from a county standpoint and from a city standpoint. Let's see. I'm wondering why certain stores are opening since we are still sheltering in place. For example, how is a sporting goods store essential? I'm just concerned that our numbers are going up. I want to pick up groceries at Sprouts and saw a huge line outside of Ross where people definitely weren't standing 6 feet apart. So as last week's county order defined, all retail, whether or not that's sporting goods stores, whether or not that's a fabric store, Lee's Books, all those are now allowed to be open. They are supposed to have, social distancing protocol in place. So it's marks on the sidewalk to tell people where to stand. If you see that, definitely tell that to, whatever the store might be, whatever the retail store might be. You need to please tell that to the owners, to the manager, because they need to be following these same orders, or to the county that you've seen, people that some retail isn't following the order. So that's really important. When will Whole Foods and the AMC Theater open? So AMC is a big question, although I've heard that they might be opening, in August. From a readiness standpoint, AMC was shooting for March 30th. So they were about to open when COVID-19 started. Now it's based upon how AMC overall is able to open up. So we'll see, the AMC location itself, the building is all complete. It's all ready. They finished all the interior work. The Whole Foods down below, they're still having, if you go by, you'll see Monday through Friday, they have people working on the interior, building that out. So from that standpoint, Whole Foods is shooting for sometime early fall, hopefully, September. I think, a lot of people are ready for it. A lot of people want to see it. So we'll see how that goes. And then, let's see. What is the status of the SEC volunteer COVID tracking program? I did the paperwork and then nothing. I met with a member of San Mateo team and they're going full speed. And using paid and not paid trackers. So from a county standpoint, they have a backlog of, I think they said they had approximately 2,000 people sign up. And so they're going through and, first they're dealing with training their staff because they need to deal with an immediate 100%, 40-hour week people trained for COVID-19 contact tracing. And then they're going to, going through the different applications. So I talked to the county supervisors last week. I'll talk to them again tomorrow, saying that there are people that applied that haven't heard. So thanks for that. This is one of the things that I like to hear. That thanks for volunteering, but the county also needs to be responsive. Whether or not your application has been first accepted, and then are you approved, and then here's what the next step is as far as getting trained and actually helping out. So setting that timeline is really important from a county standpoint. And then I'll say last question. Let's see. Do you think we'll have a plan from the school districts for the fall? Yes, we'll definitely have a plan. So I had a meeting with the new superintendent of Sunnyvale School Districts, Dr. Gallagher, earlier this week. And so he's working, he takes over officially July 1st. So Dr. Ben Picard, who's been our superintendent for so many years, is retiring after many years of postponing that retirement. He's retiring at the end of June, and it wasn't the best. He was hoping for more to be able to do kind of a final hurrah with each of his schools. That being said, with the social distancing and COVID-19, he wasn't able to do that. But I want to thank Ben, Dr. Picard, for all of his work for so many years from the school district as well as a Sunnyvale standpoint. Dr. Gallagher, did confirm that he's having 2 calls a week with the county and all the other school districts, so Fremont Union, Cupertino, Santa Clara Unified. They're meeting to figure out when they're opening up in August, and figuring out what all the measures are. The teachers are coming back to school to do final clean out for this year. So, and if there's a need for homemade masks, if you're making masks, definitely reach out to me, because they're looking for reasonable masks for teachers to make sure that they have enough when all the teachers are going back into their classrooms to do a final clean out at the end of the year. And from that standpoint, they will have a plan in action. Initially Governor Newsom said, "Oh, we're going to open up in July." That's not going to happen, but they are working forward on what the plans are with bringing teachers back, what safe social distancing will be, and how they'll deal with segmenting the classrooms safely for the students that are there. So with that, we're past 10 o'clock. So, I just want to thank you again for joining me this week. It's a busy week all the time. I'll go through the questions that you've had, as far as from a weekly standpoint. I'll go through. If you have other questions, always feel free to comment on my Facebook page. Email me at council@larryklein.com. And it's difficult. We're in June now. It's been more than 3 months, but it's not. It's difficult, but things are opening up. It's a interesting time, to say the least. I continue to be proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. People are helping their neighbor. They're making and sharing homemade face coverings. They're sharing homemade cookies, bread. I saw someone sharing sunflower plantings, seedlings that they had grown, to anyone who wanted to take them and plant them. There is those community messages in people's windows, banners in front of their house, sidewalk chalk art and messages. It's building community, and that's one of the things that I try to do with this weekly address, is try to help people build community, understand what's going on. I'm proud of the way our Sunnyvale residents have pulled together. If you're out on a walk, say hi, wave to people. from a safe social distance, but it is important to have that social interaction. I think that's really important, and what a lot of people miss, especially those people that were single and sheltering at home. But Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we'll pull through this together. Thanks for listening, and have a safe week. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye. See you.